Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone, welcome back to our TOEFL preparation course. Today I'm going to discuss the skills to nail the listening comprehension section in a TOEFL test, especially for the long conversation part. The skills to nail this part are divided into two categories. The first one is the skills that we need before listening, and the second one is while listening. Before we discuss the skills to nail the listening comprehension section for the TOEFL test, let's take a look at the procedure for the long conversations. Okay, the first one is if you have the time, preview the answers to the questions. So you might want to take a look at the multiple choices or the answers in your test book before you listen to the recording. And then listen carefully to the first line. While by listening to the first line, you can try to find out the main idea, the subject, or the topic of the conversation. And then, as you listen to the conversation, draw conclusions on who is talking, where the conversation takes place, or when it takes place. And then follow along with the answers in your test book and try to determine the correct answer while you listen to the conversation even before you listen to the questions. And then guess even you are not sure. Yeah, you never leave any answers blank because there is no penalty in a TOEFL test. And then of course use remaining time to look ahead at the answers to the questions that follow. Okay, so that is basically what you can do in a long conversation part in a TOEFL test. Okay, now let's take a look at the skills before listening, which covers skills 18 and 19. All right, the first one is anticipate the topics. Anticipating the topics before listening to the recording will help you when listening to it later. The strategy is to look briefly at the answers in the test book before you actually hear the conversations on the recording. So you might want to take a look at the um, answers, the multiple choices in your test book, and then try to find out what are the common topics in that answers so that you can guess what the topic of the conversation will be. Okay? All right, so try to determine the topics of the conversation you will hear by looking at the answers on the test book. Okay, so that's the first one. And then the second one is anticipate the questions. After you manage to anticipate the topic of the recording, try to anticipate the questions. You can also do this by looking at the answers on your test book. So you try to anticipate what the question is for each of the questions in your test book. Well, you have to do it fast though because you you should do it before you listen to the recording. Okay, for example, in your test book, you read A, in the airport, B, in the library, C, in the dormitory, and D, in the travel agent's office. And then you try to anticipate the questions. What the questions will be. Nice. The question will be, where does the conversations probably take place? Well, I mean, the questions might probably be, where does the conversation probably takes place? Okay, that the, that are the two skills that you can do before you actually listen to the recording. And now let's take a look at the next one, which is the skills that you need to do while listening to the conversation. This covers skills 20 to 22. Now let's take a look at the skills to determine the topic. Okay, before listening to the conversation, to the recording, you already try to anticipate the topic, right? And then now, while listening, the first thing to do is, of course, to determine the topic. And you can find the topic, you can try to determine the topic by listening to the first few lines of the conversations. Let's take a look at the example. On the recording, you hear, "You can't believe what I just got. I bet you got that new car you've always wanted. Now, how in the world did you figure that out?" Okay, when you listen to these conversations, then you can try to determine the topic, which is, right, the new car that the man just got. The conversation will probably um, goes. The conversation will probably about this new car that the man has just got, right? Okay, so you already determined the topics. And then what can you do next after you find the topic? You can then try to draw conclusions about who, what, when, and where. As you listen to the conversation, you should be trying to set the situation in your mind. You should be thinking about the following thoughts. Who is talking? Okay, who is talking? When does the conversation probably take place? Where does the conversation probably take place? And what is the source information for the conversation? Let's take a look at the example. On the recording, you hear, "Why do you have so many books?" "I need them for my paper on George Washington." "Do you know how I can check them out?" "Yes, you should go downstairs to the circulation desk and fill out a card for each book." Then you think, who, where, what? Who is probably talking? Probably to students. Where are they? In the library. And what course are they discussing? American history, because the woman would like to borrow some books to um, to make her paper on George Washington. So the course is probably on the American history. Okay, so that is the next skill, which is draw conclusions about who, what, when, and where. The next one is listening for answers in order. The answers to the questions in long conversations are usually found in order in a conversation. That is what you should keep in mind. It means that when you, for example, find the answers to the second questions on the fourth line, line of the conversation, then the answers to the third question must be found after the fourth line. So it can be found in line 5 or 6 or 7 and etc. Okay, so as you listen, look at the multiple choices on your test book and try to determine the answers by anticipating the questions. Okay, so now you already know the skills that you can do, that you can have before and while you listen to the conversation or the recording in a TOEFL test, especially for the long conversation, because you have not only a two-line dialogue, right? So the first one, remember the first one is to anticipate the topic. So you should anticipate the topic first, so you should anticipate the topic first by looking at the answers on your test book. And then you anticipate the question. And then when you listen to the recording, you try to determine the topic and then try to follow along while listening. Follow along the multiple choices or the answers in your test book to try to anticipate the answers by anticipating the questions. I hope that it's all clear for you guys. I would like you to try to do all the skills that I have explained when you try to answer the questions that I have provided in my class. Okay, so after you listen to this video, go to the quiz and try to do the skills that I already explained to you when you answer the questions on the quiz. Thank you and good luck. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.